The rain poured relentlessly as a young delivery boy navigated the dimly lit streets, balancing a stack of food orders on his scooter. Life hadn't been easy for him, but he wore a smile, knowing his small acts of service could brighten someone's day. His next delivery led him to an old, modest house at the edge of town. The door creaked open to reveal a weary widow with a soft, kind voice. She thanked him profusely, her eyes betraying a hint of struggle behind her gratitude. What the delivery boy didn't know was that this woman carried a secret, a life far removed from the humble image she projected. Despite her hardships, she had quietly dedicated herself to helping others in need, her generosity hidden behind the walls of her simple home. But tonight, their paths would cross in a way that neither could have anticipated. As he handed over the food, he noticed something unusual, a faint shimmer of hope in her eyes, as if she saw more in him than just a delivery boy. Little did he know, this seemingly ordinary encounter was about to change both their lives forever. The delivery boy hesitated for a moment as the widow handed him a crumpled bill for the meal. Her hands trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but notice how thin her fingers were, as though she hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Keep the change," she said softly, but her voice carried a weight that made him pause. The amount was so small it barely counted as a tip, but he could tell it was all she could spare. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. She nodded with a faint smile, her tired eyes meeting his. Yes. Thank you for bringing this so quickly. It means a lot." As he walked back to his scooter, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had delivered to countless homes, seen countless faces, but there was something about her, an unspoken sadness mingled with quiet dignity that stuck with him. He glanced back once more before starting his engine, and through the cracked window, he saw her carefully splitting the meal into 2 portions. She set one aside, wrapping it in foil as if saving it for someone else. The sight tugged at his heart, but he pushed it aside. He had other deliveries to make. The next day, he found himself back at the same house. She had ordered the cheapest item on the menu, just like before. This time, when she opened the door, he noticed a small child peeking out from behind her skirt. The boy's wide, curious eyes scanned the delivery boy, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of excitement in his face. The widow quickly ushered the child back inside, murmuring something about staying warm. "You have a son?" the delivery boy asked, trying to sound casual. The widow stiffened, but nodded. Yes, he's all I have." The boy smiled faintly, not wanting to pry, but his curiosity grew. As he rode away, he couldn't help but wonder about their story. What had happened to leave them in such a state? And why did she seem so determined to keep her struggles hidden? Over the next few weeks, their interactions became more frequent. The widow ordered small meals, always careful not to spend too much. The delivery boy began slipping extra items into her bag, a small loaf of bread here, a carton of milk there, pretending it was a mistake when she questioned it. At first, she resisted, but her gratitude eventually won out. One evening, as he handed her the food, he noticed the child sitting at a small table in the background, drawing on a scrap of paper with a broken crayon. "He's talented," the delivery boy said, nodding toward the boy's artwork. The widow hesitated before replying. "He loves to draw. It's his escape." The delivery boy nodded, understanding more than he let on. He had grown up in a similar situation, finding solace in small joys while his mother worked tirelessly to make ends meet. He wanted to do more for them, but he knew he had to tread carefully. Pride was a fragile thing, and he didn't want to offend her by overstepping. One day, curiosity got the better of him. After finishing his shift, he returned to the neighborhood and asked around about the widow. The neighbors were tight-lipped at first, but eventually, an elderly woman shared a piece of the puzzle. "She's been through a lot," the woman said. "Lost her husband a few years ago. He was a good man, but their savings ran dry after he got sick. She's been doing odd jobs to keep her son fed, but it's never enough. She won't take charity, though. She's too proud for that." The delivery boy felt a pang of guilt for prying, but the more he learned, the more he wanted to help. He decided to save part of his tips each night, hoping to gather enough to make a real difference for them. Meanwhile, the widow had her own secret. Late at night, after her son had fallen asleep, she would sit at her old desk, poring over letters and receipts. One evening, as the delivery boy arrived with her order, he noticed something unusual. A sleek black car was parked outside her house, its tinted windows hiding the occupant inside. The widow seemed uneasy as she accepted the food, glancing nervously at the car. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sensing her discomfort. She nodded quickly. "It's nothing. Just someone I used to know." But as he rode away, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Who was in the car? And why did it seem like she was hiding something? The next day, he returned to find the car gone, but the widow's demeanor had changed. She seemed more guarded, her usual warmth replaced by a quiet tension. The delivery boy decided not to press her, but his concern grew. Unknown to him, the car belonged to a wealthy businessman who had once been a close friend of her husband. He had offered her financial help after her husband's death, but his intentions weren't entirely pure. She had refused, unwilling to compromise her dignity or her son's future. Now, he was back, pressuring her to accept his generosity in exchange for favors she wasn't willing to give. As the delivery boy continued to visit, he began to notice other strange occurrences. A man lingering near the house, a letter slipped under the door that made the widow's face pale when she read it. He knew something was wrong, but she refused to confide in him. The tension between them grew, each hiding their own struggles while trying to protect the other. The delivery boy's savings grew slowly, but he worried it wouldn't be enough. The widow, meanwhile, wrestled with the weight of her secret life as a philanthropist, fearing it might put her and her son in danger if it were discovered. And then, one night, everything came to a head. The delivery boy arrived to find the house dark, the door slightly ajar. His heart raced as he stepped inside, calling out for her. There was no response, only the faint sound of footsteps retreating into the night. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The delivery boy's heart pounded as he stood in the dimly lit doorway of the widow's house. The air felt heavy, filled with a silence that was deafening. He stepped cautiously into the house, calling out again. "Hello? Are you here?" His voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the emptiness. The faint sound of retreating footsteps he had heard moments ago was gone now, leaving him with an eerie sense of unease. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he noticed the room was in disarray. The table where the boy usually sat drawing was overturned, papers scattered across the floor. A chair lay on its side, as though someone had left in a hurry. Panic surged through him as he searched the house, calling for the widow and her son. Each empty room he entered only heightened his fear. They were gone. He found himself standing in the small kitchen, his mind racing. That sleek black car he'd seen a few days ago flashed in his memory, along with the widow's uneasy expression. Who was that man? And why did she seem so afraid of him? The delivery boy clenched his fists, anger and worry mingling in his chest. He had to find her, but where could she have gone? As he stepped outside, he noticed something glinting on the ground near the doorway. Bending down, he picked up a small silver bracelet. It was delicate, with tiny engravings that he couldn't make out in the dim light. He recognized it immediately. It was the one the widow's son always wore. She must have dropped it in her haste. Clutching it tightly, he vowed to do whatever it took to find them. The next morning, he returned to the neighborhood, asking around if anyone had seen the widow or her son. Most people shook their heads, but the elderly woman who had shared their story before hesitated. "I saw a man near her house last night," she said. He looked angry, and she left shortly after. "I think she was trying to avoid him." The delivery boy pressed for more details, but the woman didn't know where they might have gone. He decided to visit the restaurant where he worked, hoping his boss might have some advice. The owner, a kind but no-nonsense man, listened intently as the delivery boy explained everything. "She's in trouble," the boy said, his voice firm. "I can't just sit by and do nothing." The owner nodded. "I might know someone who can help. Give me a few hours." True to his word, the owner connected the delivery boy with a friend who worked in a local community center. The man was well connected and had helped many families in need. After hearing the story, he promised to spread the word and keep an eye out for the widow and her son. Days turned into a week, and there was still no sign of them. The delivery boy began to lose hope, but he refused to give up. Every spare moment he had was spent searching, asking questions, and retracing his steps. Then one evening, he received a call from the man at the community center. "I think we found them," the man said. "They're staying at a shelter downtown." Relief flooded the delivery boy as he raced to the address. When he arrived, he spotted the widow sitting in a corner, her arms wrapped protectively around her son. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, but when she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. "You found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. The delivery boy knelt beside her, his heart aching at the sight of her distress. "What happened?" he asked gently. She hesitated before explaining. The man in the black car had been pressuring her to accept his help, but his intentions were far from noble. When she refused, he began showing up unannounced, leaving threatening letters and making her feel unsafe. The night she disappeared, he had confronted her, demanding she leave town if she wouldn't comply. Fearing for her son's safety, she had fled with nothing but a small bag of belongings. The delivery boy listened in silence, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "You don't have to face this alone," he said finally. "We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, the delivery boy worked tirelessly to help the widow get back on her feet. With the help of the community center, they secured temporary housing and began exploring legal options to deal with the man who had been harassing her. The widow was hesitant at first, but with the delivery boy's unwavering support, she found the courage to stand up for herself. Meanwhile, the delivery boy learned more about the widow's secret philanthropy. Despite her struggles, she had been sending small donations to families in need, often through anonymous channels. Her selflessness inspired him, and he realized that even in her darkest moments, she had been a beacon of hope for others. Word of her story began to spread, and soon, members of the community rallied around her. Donations poured in, and a local lawyer offered to take her case pro bono. The man who had been threatening her was eventually confronted by the authorities and forced to leave her alone. As the widow and her son began to rebuild their lives, the delivery boy found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He realized that kindness, no matter how small, could create ripples that changed lives. His simple decision to add a loaf of bread to her order had set off a chain of events that brought an entire community together. Months later, the widow opened a small art studio with the help of the donations she had received. She taught classes for children, including her son, who had flourished under her care. The delivery boy visited often, their bond stronger than ever. One evening, as they sat together in the studio, the widow turned to him with a smile. "You've done so much for us," she said. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you." The delivery boy shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You've inspired me more than you know." She reached for the silver bracelet her son had dropped that night, now polished and shining. "This belongs to you," she said, placing it in his hand. A reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. The delivery boy held the bracelet tightly, his heart full. As he left the studio that night, he looked up at the stars, feeling a sense of purpose he had never known before. This journey had taught him that everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter how small their role might seem.